That sounds good.
That'll work.
Howdy.
All right, it is 10 o'clock. We'll call the meeting to order. And we'll discuss possible action to excuse absences of members, which I don't see any. We have missing it. With Keisha, Dave, and Brian, so we should be good. All right, housekeeping, Ms. Vanessa.
Okay, same housekeeping per usual, but it's always a good reminder. So if you are a member, this is particularly important for this one because we do have that link available. If you are a member and you can have your camera on, that is super helpful. As a member, you can feel free to speak up as you would in any other meeting, of course. We do ask that you stay muted if not speaking, just because it always seems to be the day where like something's going on outside or whatever, and it picks up that sound. So also there's that raise hand function that looks like a smiley face like this, either at the bottom or the top of your screen. You can push it to raise your hand. You can also unraise it, or don't forget to unraise your hand, or else your hand will stay up and they'll keep asking you if you have something. But again, if you're a member and you want to speak, you can 100% speak up, or you can do that raise hand function, and we do try and monitor it, but sometimes when things are really going, you don't see it as much. And then for those of you that are in the room, you may have noticed that we have our new Jumbotron surface. It's very exciting. It will zoom in on you when you're talking, or if you move a certain way. Importantly though, this is our microphone. You do not have to yell, maybe speak not super softly, but I'm going to contradict that by saying this thing will pick up side conversations, so be cool. And know that it does do that. So I just like full disclosure to everyone, it will pick up a side conversation. And I think that's it.
All right. Do what?
Just somebody joining the meeting.
Item number 4, remarks from the chair. I think the only thing I really want to just bring up is that we do have, we are in the process of selecting the new committee members. Commissioners have met on that. We're still working through that process. We have 2 inspector members to choose for full terms. We have an inspector member to choose to replace Scott's remaining term, and then an alternate, and then 2 public members as well, right? Or 3 public members. Is it 2? 2 public members. 2 public members. Yeah. So hopefully, I think by the next meeting, we'll know who those are going to be, but we'll get those slots filled. I don't really have anything else other than that. So we'll move on to item number 5, ratification of the minutes of the April 17, 2023 meeting. The minutes were sent out and have been posted on the website for some time. Was there anybody who had any modifications that need to be done to the minutes? Hearing none, those will stand ratified. Item number 6, general comments from visitors or written comments on non-agenda items. We'll go ahead and start with one that we have in person. David, you can stand up and introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Dave Height, High Tech Inspections out of Houston. We're working on forming a school for home inspectors, and we're right now in the process of ratifying our school. We've got all our paperwork in. But I'd like to talk about and get on the agenda the possibility of doing virtual ride-alongs as part of the software. And here's the reasoning for that. There's no feedback loop on your ride-alongs. We have no idea, are they getting a good experience? Is their eye developing? Are they missing anything? And we don't know, are they seeing a pier and beam? Are they seeing a slab? Are they doing a 3-story, a 4-story, multi-family? And by doing it virtually, you can control the experience as well as they can repeat the experience and give us feedback on what they're seeing, where their weaknesses are, and where they need to improve. So it actually allows us on the ride-along portion of it to see how they're doing to actually install it. And so I'd like to get that on there. I'd like to talk about that because that is something I think, as well as for people in remote places, I mean, they don't have the opportunity. a lot of times they'll have to go to Austin or San Antonio or Houston to do that. But I think there's a lot of advantages that I can absolutely talk about on using that gives us as an educational body the ability to go back and go, hey, here's where you did or didn't. And I don't know if virtual reality, not my thing, a little old for that, but it is fact. It is absolutely, if you ever, and we'd be happy to show you how that works, but virtual reality is you're literally walking through the house looking at it like it's there. So it's a great experience. There would be a grading system of some sort. For example, you miss a water intrusion that's obvious, not like yours, but an obvious one, you'd fail that right along. You'd have to go back and redo it until your eye develops to a point. So that we could then hopefully, when they're out of school, have them better prepared. I mean, our school is going to be different. It's going to be fantastic. I cannot tell you how excited I am. The curriculum is being written by an individual with a master's degree in education, based on learning, based on visual inspection. So like to get that on the schedule so we can talk about that and talk about the pros and the cons and see if that's something we'd be willing to do to adopt that.
So you said Rylon, but you're referring to the practicum.
The practicum.
Okay,
Yes.
not Rylon.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Just clarification, because they are two different things. So. Anybody have any questions for David?
And to solve that problem, ours is going to have a software in it where they get to actually start thinking about how to use a software so they don't have to do the PDF.
Okay. So if we can put that on a future agenda, please.
Do you want the education subcommittee to talk about it first, or do you?
Actually, probably.
Because the only reason I bring it up is they're currently talking about the practicum anyway.
So I'm going to go to that meeting.
Okay.
That's fine.
You got nothing better to do.
Okay.
Yeah, we can start it there and move it up through. Okay. That'll work. Anybody else in person to speak on agenda item 6? We do have some public comments that came through.
I think those are for agenda item 9,
Okay, all of them?
or just the one I passed out. Did somebody give you a different one?
No, I'm just trying to see so we had Brian Gruhl
Oh,
for agenda item 6.
Yeah.
Regarding the report itself, revisiting the actual report and whether we still need check boxes, stuff of that nature. That was one aspect of what he was looking at. We beat the report kind of to death over the last few years, especially when we redid everything that went into place February of last year. We can certainly look at the possibility of, or SOP can look at the report itself if we want to modify that, but I don't think we have a whole lot of.
Yeah, when we went through it, we talked about it a lot.
Yeah.
With all the new softwares out there, stuff like that. And we just came back, if we're gonna continue to have, we want to have a template, then we got to stick with something. So, I mean, that's where we left it. Just a point of, just a note on this. When I was looking at the reports that he generates or the software he's using, just need to remind everybody that's listening or going to listen that the first report that has to go out according to TREIC rules is the report, the
Promulgated.
the promulgated form.
7-6.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which is not what you see.
True.
Some of these situations.
Okay, so the second part of this, the third part kind of lays into the first part, but the second part was a little interesting. It's about the broker quote unquote shakedowns. So there was a rule, there's been a rule in place for years about inspectors not being allowed to pay to be on a preferred list of providers. It's been the case for some time. Only in the last, I think, within the last year or two, that got moved over into 4 years ago now.
This when Carrie was general
It really
counsel.
was. To where there was a rule against inspectors doing it, but there's no rule for brokers to, solicit it and go after it. And now that is on the broker's side as well. But this is basically talking about how that's still happening, and I can attest to the fact that that is still happening. That it is, I get complaints about it all the time about inspectors or other service providers are not allowed to walk into a brokerage unless they pay X amount of fees or whatnot. Some of these fees get pretty darn excessive. My response to that every single time is you got to file a complaint. We can put the rule in place. We can put it out there, but unless you file a complaint, TREC can't do anything. TREC doesn't have a force that goes out and spot checks brokerages and does audits in that respect. And so if you don't file a complaint, it's hard for TREC to do anything. And that's always been kind of my position on it. I understand from the service provider's position, they're afraid if they file a complaint, there'll be retribution. There's that possibility, and that's certainly there. But we are obligated as license holders to report and file complaints on those that are violating the rules, and specifically blatantly violating the rules. So to me, it just kind of goes back to that. The rule is in place, but if you don't file a complaint, there's nothing anybody can do. Anybody else want to throw in 2 cents on that?
That's what I was gonna say. You gotta file, there has to be complaints filed about all this stuff.
Yeah.
Or there's not gonna be any enforcement.
I mean, you can pay for reasonable advertising costs and stuff like that, but there's some guidelines there. I know it still happens, but you can't expect certain entities to stop doing a practice until something happens. In a bright cherry world, the rule change, we're gonna go ahead and stop what we're doing. But when you have a revenue stream that's there, you're not gonna give it up too easily. So as much as I may agree with certain aspects of this comment, there's, in the end, you gotta file a complaint. If you don't file a complaint, it's kind of hard to break that down. All right. All right, anything else under item number 6? All right, then we'll move on to item number 7, reports from subcommittees. Education subcommittee.
All right, we met on June 20th, probably about an hour or so meeting. We're talking about the practicum, so today we're meeting after this meeting to just kind of get more information from TREC, because we're trying to develop standards. So we don't want to just come up with random numbers, because we were just throwing around, how about 8 hours, how about this many hours? So we're trying to get more data on that before we establish what we're going to recommend for apprentice inspectors. And both the topics that we talked about were all just following up today on.
Okay.
So wanted more information, come today's meeting after this meeting.
All right.
Not too many.
Yeah, if you're on it,
I
I believe the subcommittees are now 4 inspectors, so that unless an committee members. So if unless one of them is going to dial out, that's it, because otherwise there's a quorum.
Yep. All right, SOP subcommittee, Mr. Steve.
We had a meeting on the 11th of this month, just last week. Had 2 items of discussion, which both have been talked about quite a bit: gas appliance connectors and shut-off valves.
And they're on the agenda.
And the electrical disconnects. So that was the only meeting we've had, and we'll discuss those more in depth as we get to that part of the agenda.
Okay. I will tell the people online, I did mute a couple people just because we were starting to get some feedback, so I apologize if you do have something that you want to mention, please use that raise hand feature like she mentioned. I just did mute a couple people because we were starting to get some kickback in the audio. So item number 8, staff reports, executive division.
Awesome. I'll start and then Tony can add or fill in. Just a few kind of general things. You mentioned the search committee. So I'll just say that that process is underway and robust. they will be interviewing the finalists, but I don't think that has yet been scheduled. But mainly, thank you to those involved in the process for taking the time to make it meaningful. So TBD on those selections. Here at TREIC, we are knee deep, waist deep, I don't know. We're heavily involved in the RAMP implementation project, which will be our new licensing and regulatory database that will affect every division in our agency. That implementation lasts about 18 months, and we are a couple of months in. We're in the phase that we call tailoring, where every division spends a good chunk of time, a week or two, if not longer, with our vendor who's doing the implementation to make sure what they're developing fit is tailored to what we need. So with each division who schedules that time, they're then pulled off from their other regularly scheduled work, of course. We've been able to cover the bandwidth on that. We'll kind of get a little bit behind and then catch up without any sort of long-term effects. But I wanted y'all to be aware of that so that if you reach out to any of our staff, or if it takes a little bit longer to hear from someone, it could be that that division is involved in that process. I have encouraged our staff to take this with as much seriousness as we can possibly muster, because it's a front end heavy lift that then will help render positive results for many years to come. But it is a heavy lift. So that is going on. It will be until really the end of next summer, at least. We're also at least waist or neck deep in implementation for everything that passed during the legislative session. This is the summer of implementation for that. So you'll see a lot of that reflected in our August commission agenda. It's also budget season, so a final budget will be on the August agenda, which just affects, our biggest cost driver is staff salaries, of course. I think that's it on just the kind of administration of the agency and how we're spending our time these days. Do you have anything you want to add?
Just maybe that we're going to be talking about the specific inspector bill later on, but also in case anyone's curious, there's special sessions currently going on. They are only on called items, so the governor has a called item, while other bills might be filed during those special sessions. If they're not on the call, they won't be heard. So we monitor that stuff just to make sure, but it's likely that there will not be anything that impacts anybody at the agency. I mean, knock on wood, during the special sessions. So.
All right. Enforcement Division, Mr. Malloy.
Tony Renteria, staff attorney and liaison to the inspector committee. It was a slow period. We did have a couple of orders come in. I think the first one might have been addressed at the last meeting. So really the April 5th order came in after we had already submitted our report. We also have a new order that came in after we submitted this report. So that order will be on the next meeting's report. But if you have any questions, just let me know about this order. I also want to say that we've, just generally speaking, we had a SOA hearing. We don't have a lot of hearings. Every once in a while, like every year, couple of years, we have an inspector hearing, and that went well. I can't really comment too much on it because it's still pending. I just want to express my thanks to our expert and to the inspector committee when they volunteer. Their expertise is very important. We could not do this without their help and participation. It takes a lot of time. So we want to say thank you.
All right. And that new one that just came through, it's another one with the wrong report form, right? And that one, I think that's what I saw come through.
I believe so. It went out to the committee.
Last week, yeah.
Year and a half in, we're still using the wrong report.
Yeah, it stops, but we have periods where we get more. But, for from my experience here, we get complaints involving people who are using a report that's like many, many years old. They just never change.
Yeah.
So, but we, like you said earlier, we can't do anything unless somebody files a complaint.
All right, Education and Examinations Division.
All right, good morning. My name is Mike Sample-Dill. I'm the Education Manager in the Education Examinations Division. All the reports are included in your material, and unless there's any questions, there's nothing unusual to report. Our processing times are within goal.
All right, anybody have any questions? Licensing Division. Denise.
Good morning, Denise Sample, Licensing Director. And the reports for through May are included in your materials. So on that first report, you'll see applications received in the bottom left corner. So 395 professional inspector applications received so far this fiscal year. The last time I'd say we had a normal year, because if you recall, 21 was a peak number of applications ahead of the requirements changing. That number was 418 at this time of that fiscal year. So I'd say, nothing alarming, but we continue to monitor that. The next report is the renewal activity. Inspectors' information is on the right-hand side of that report. And the renewal rates are what we key in on. And so this compares fiscal year 21, 2 years prior to fiscal year 22. It's apples to apples because the licenses renew every 2 years. The next report is the license holder counts. The inspectors are right there in the center of that graph, 4,811 at the end of May. And out of those, 4,124 active. The next page is the graphical presentation of that. And then the last one is the average number of days to process an application. We are right at, around 5 days for professional inspector apps and apprentice inspector applications. And that's the time, as a reminder, for my team to respond to and process an application. It doesn't take into account the amount of time for an applicant to pass the exam or clear the background check.
I noticed we've seen like a 5% drop in active license inspectors just in the last 7 or 8 months. Like 200 inspectors.
Yeah.
Sharply.
Market slow,
Yeah.
freaking out.
Or you think just
I think
not succeeding in the business?
I think we had so many come through
Yeah.
right about that COVID time
During
that,
the boom.
I think it's just inevitable when you have that many new ones come in that, when they're making millions right off the bat. So it's like, they're going to do something else.
That's what the flyer said.
That's
Yeah, exactly.
exactly right.
So that concludes my report. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. I like the colored graphs, visual represent. It's easier to understand what's happening in the graphs were so visual. It's good.
All right. Item number 9, discussion of possible action regarding fillable fields on the property inspection report form, RAI 7-6. So we did receive some comments about this. So on the TREIC website, the form that is downloadable, it's very limited as to what you can put in there as far as you want to download it, make it, and modify it to put in commentary, add pictures, so on and so forth. The checkboxes are active, so you can do that. But going in and actually adding information in there is not really possible.
Without like a paid Adobe editor.
Right. Right. So one of the things that I'm curious about, and there's the report up there, one of the things that I'm curious about is, would it be possible for TREIC to produce a Word document that they could just expand and edit? Now, obviously, the rules are very clear as far as what you can and cannot do to the report as far as modifications are concerned. And anybody who takes that form, if we were to create it as a template on the website and modify it, they're subject to those rules. But how much of a pain would that be for us to create a Word-based editable template for somebody to use?
Or like the additional information is fillable and it
Right.
would expand.
Right. Well, but I think, and what Tony and I were talking about before, if you expand it, sometimes when you print it out, it may cut part of that off.
Really? Okay.
Sometimes Adobe will do that if it has a certain block, depending on how it's formatted.
Oh, so like that block there, could a block like that be put after every comment in each section? So it could be filled with, and maybe what you ran into there is when they created that, they put a limit, maybe character limit.
Maybe.
So if somebody in the field, like in school, wanted to use that, it's not really usable because adding things on it and stuff.
Unless you're
But
gonna
if
print it
it-
and handwrite it.
But if it had that, like the additional information block, had that, a block like that after every section comment, where you couldn't edit the text, but after it is a fillable block.
Tony?
I was just going to comment that just to remind the committee that by rule in 223, 535, 223, the inspector is allowed to add additional pages if the space provided on the form is not adequate to explain. I just wanted to put that out there as well.
But to be more realistic, after they graduate, they're gonna buy software that does that. And that this will, as close to that bot software, mimic that by just having that space between comment and the next block. Be able to expand with just a writable block right there would probably do it.
And I mean, I think it would be too, as far as creating, basically you're talking about creating 50 writable blocks
Well,
in that report.
and-
I'm just curious if we just
if it's,
change it to a Word document, then they can edit and add those spaces as they deem necessary.
then you're dealing with macros and everything.
And there's also other areas that gotta be filled in, like the location of the water meter right now doesn't have a block that you can fill in.
That's what I was saying. You're just gonna have
Yeah,
40 or 50
right,
blocks. That they-
Right.
But it's,
Can it be
You're just
converted to Word?
you're just replicating it though.
I think we could explore what works best in terms of like, is it Word, is it something else that I don't know the name of?
But it won't be perfect. It's not something we're actually giving.
Right.
supposed to
Well,
be
I know
giving
there's
clients.
Word templates, can be done, because I got one originally from Champions way back, and it was not great. It's not the easiest thing to do once you have the template to add in. But for somebody who's going through school, like, one of the commenters there, instead of having to download. Instead of going through all that and having to purchase more software and go through all that, if we had just something there. Whether, do I think it would be used a whole lot? Probably not. But because I think the vast majority of people that are going to go through school and be in this industry are going to purchase the software. You're spending thousands of dollars on your education, spending a couple $100 on software is a pretty reasonable cost of doing business, and I don't think that should be an issue. But just for the sake of argument, if we were to have something that is editable, even if it's not ultra fancy, I think we just have a Word document in there that could be editable as long as they know what the rules are. I mean, we can make that part of the download. When you download it, the first page is a blurb of here's what the rules are of what you can or can't modify as part of that
And
document.
instructions.
Certain ranges of that document could be locked.
Yeah.
I mean, that's.
I just remember my old Word one, it was easy to mess things up.
Oh, yeah,
But
absolutely.
if this one was locked, and like you say, some of the text is locked, similar to the PDF.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's changed in the 20 years since I used the Word.
Can I comment?
Sure.
I have some concerns about a Word document.
Okay.
Not everyone has Word in general. It's a paid subscription. I mean, just like PDFs are in general. I mean, my division with the complaint form, we've messed around with the complaint form multiple times. The fillable block area is an issue where you can set certain things within Adobe. But if they were really verbose, so they needed to use, I found a lot of deficiencies, they would definitely have to use that attachment thing. I have concerns that if you use a Word document, it's more easy to get corrupted.
Okay.
Or they could change words in the preamble that may be more difficult for my staff to notice. Where
You
that's
can do
not
that
locked
now.
in. Now, I know Word, you can do stuff as, like you can't edit it, but there's still ways to get around that. I mean, there's ways to get around the
You can do
PDF
that.
as
You
well.
can change.
Yeah, you can change all that
words
as
on any
well.
type of form.
No, I get that. I just said word that when you send it to someone for a Word document, you can open it up with a different program and it looks totally different. Or at least Adobe Viewer, that's at least a free product where if, at least it would look
Okay.
hopefully as close as possible to the complaint form or to the inspection form that, you know.
So if we were to add in what would end up amounting to be 40 or 50 blocks.
Yeah, a bunch of empty spots, yes.
You know, I mean, is that feasible? Is that something we could do?
Well, so I think ultimately what you would want to do is ask us to look at what works best if you do want to make it fillable, because there might be other options that we're not even thinking about.
Okay.
And I'm saying that because I'm not a pro. I don't know what all the, we use Publisher, we use
Right.
Straight Word, there's Adobe. So we could look at that to the extent this committee thinks it's a good idea to have it be a fillable form. Like, I think that's really the issue of, is that something that you would like to recommend we start looking into? We bring it back to you as to what it looks like in terms of, does that seem like that would work for someone who's using this form in that way? I think we could do something like that.
Is the intent just for training purposes, not to make a product that can be used?
I think the training purpose is just because of who's making the comment. But I think realistically, if you have the form there, if TREIC is saying you have to use this form, if we could put one up there that is in an editable format that anybody could use, whether they're pre-licensure or post-licensure, I think would be a good thing. I don't think it'll be highly utilized, to be perfectly honest with you. I think the vast majority of people are still going to get software. But I think at least having the free option that's there, we start talking about governance directive of, roadblocks into the industry, stuff like that. If we can help lower that down, I think that's a good thing overall.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's traditionally not been fillable for reasons or?
I would say concerns of manipulation and just, there's never been a demand necessarily for it.
Okay.
But they would, I think, more concerned of people editing it, but, like Mike said, you can edit that any way you want, so it was more just quality control. And there's just no real demand that I remember historically.
This comes up about every couple of 3 years.
So we could look into developing that form. I think you're right. I mean, the moment we put something out, then when it doesn't work for someone, is it on,
Right.
And the answer is no. Right. But I think, if this committee wants us to look into it, then we could come back with something. We could take it to a subcommittee first.
SOP?
SOP?
Probably work.
Yeah.
I
I agree. I thought the idea, if we're mandating it, we should at least have the option where somebody could use it without going to a third party.
There are issues and pitfalls because on some of our stuff that's available, depending on how people open it, what top programs that they have, a newer version of Adobe or not, some stuff may not show up. So there are pitfalls that I think we'll have to explore.
That's what's kind of strange is for 20 years, back when we didn't have the technology, we were building it in Word, right? Guys were figuring out how to put it in Word.
Yeah.
20 years ago when we didn't have all the technology we had, it was never an issue. And now, like the amount of technology is accessible, is robust, and it's an issue now.
There's just gaps because we noticed when people file complaints, they may not save it properly, or whatever version is different than ours. So then some things don't show up, especially if you're putting other types of, if you're inserting non-text oriented things, that's when it gets.
Well, and in the end, the inspector is responsible for the product that he produces. So if the final product isn't coming through, that's on the inspector to adjust whatever modifications he made.
And we could have something like you mentioned, like an instructions, even like please be aware.
Like even if we took that section of the rule, it just says, here's what you can modify, and put that as the first 2 pages of that, just so that there's no question. Well, here's the report, but I didn't know I couldn't modify that. Here it is. It's
and also at the end, we're not tech support. you can't call TREIC to figure out why this is not downloaded, because that's what you're gonna get. It's not opening properly, it's not downloading
It may be
properly.
one of
What
the
you pay
reasons why
for.
we do.
Yeah.
I could see so that we have a download of the report form now, but maybe the first page of that would be instructions. Just like if you were downloading a W-9 from IRS, there's an instruction page and then you get to it. Maybe that will help put the instructions right there in front of them.
Thanks.
Anytime they call.
If you wanted to do a vote to recommend that, staff bring something back to the
So
SOP.
entertain motion for staff to look into a modifiable template report for the 7-6. Motion made.
I'll second that.
Second. Any further discussion on that item? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Motley?
He raised his hand.
Okay, and Keisha, I couldn't see her. She's still there. Keisha, are you in favor or against?
Oh, she raised her hand.
Okay, got it. Thank you. All right, motion passes.
So it'll go to the SOP subcommittee?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure I've got mine in.
All right, item number 10, discussion of possible action regarding the reporting of deficiencies. Everybody guess my connector shut off.
So I guess do you want to lead in what brought this on to?
I'm happy to if you want me to.
Yeah, you bring it in, then we can. Side of it.
So when the SOPs were revamped, there was an added section for the gas distribution system. And in that, it talks about the appliance connectors, I believe. I was going to pull it up, just look at it. But in that section, it talks about reporting deficiencies of gas appliance. And then under the appliance section, it specifically mentions report deficiencies of a gas appliance that aren't connected with the gas distribution system. So the confusion stems from inspectors wondering where they're supposed to report any deficiencies essentially from the appliance to the gas shutoff valve. Correct? Am I wrong about that? Where do you report that? And the rule states that you would do that under the gas distribution system, but I think most people don't see that connector, the yellow gold connector or whatever, going from the gas appliance to the shutoff valve as being part of the gas distribution system, even though the rules contemplate that that's where you report it. So that was the discussion as to what to do about that. You can go from there, or I can talk about what the committee.
So we discussed it, and the belief is that the appliance flex connect, the gas connector, the distribution system goes from the service at the meter to basically the shuttle. And that's distribution. What you would get when you buy a house. When you get it to the shutoff, you buy a gas dryer, you're gonna buy the dryer, and you're gonna buy the gas flex connector. Doesn't come with it. That's part of the appliance. So the belief, my belief when this first was added to the system, that flex connector in the appliance would be in the appliance section in the gas distribution, was from the meter to the shutoff. And then, and maybe the SOP committee that was involved in putting that together, maybe they had a different interpretation, because that appliance connector is included as a defect in the gas distribution. I think it should be in the appliance.
Right.
And that's the confusion. The confusion is, where do I put it? Some people are putting in both. And enforcement can address the fact that they've mentioned once before that they probably would not take any action on someone as long as it's in the report somewhere.
in a reasonable section.
Well,
Don't put it in the foundation section, it's not gonna be
Yes,
accessible.
but the idea, the two options would be the section that it belongs to would be the appliance, or the one that says, put a defect in the gas distribution system. Either place, it's in the report.
And the solution that this SOP subcommittee came up with was to do an education article on the website to inform mainly inspectors, but also if any consumer or client were to go look at it, they'd understand that this is acceptable to do this. So just give a little bit of guidance, also explain what the enforcement division expects. In other words, as Steve mentioned, if you put it in the foundation section, there might be a problem, but if you put it in appliance or the gas distribution system, there shouldn't be an issue with that as long as it's reported properly in one of those two sections. So,
And we'll put it on the list for the next SOP review to look at the wording and the verbiage that's in there. We're just not gonna start that review until probably next year when we have all the new committee members, because there's no point in starting it and then having a big shift in committee members, so.
And there was discussion about, having already started a list of little things like that. Some are like, we talk about housekeeping stuff, clarifying or rearranged. I mean, there were enough changes that it was reasonable to some things, kind of like that.
Can you make sure that you send us your list, me or Tony or whatever, before your departure? So that we know to work on those things for next year if you aren't gonna be.
and then
We talked about this a lot during our meetings.
Yeah.
And what we kept coming back to is if it's a problem related to the appliance, there's a gas leak at the appliance, an ignition problem with the appliance, and that's reported in the appliance section. When we were rewriting them,
right.
because we copied and pasted or whatever. You took stuff from the old one and we started modifying it. And
This used 20 years ago when we
Right,
had it, we just brought it back.
and we modified it, but we had a lot of conversations about that. And so if it was related to the appliance, we reported it in the appliance section. If it's related to the gas system, then we would report it in that. Maybe the use of gas distribution, the wording.
I think the confusion comes from the definition of gas distribution,
Right.
because it talks about from the meter to the shutoff valve.
Yeah.
And then under the gas distribution section, there's a section that says
Right.
gas appliance
Right.
connector. So that's where the confusion comes. So we just want to make sure that we're because of that inconsistency, that there's an article out there that lets the inspectors know what's expected of them in terms of reporting. And also, so they're not thinking that if they do it in the appliance section, that the enforcement division is going to come
Right.
down with a hammer on them as well, so long as it's reported properly in one of those two sections.
The analogy we gave was the dryer cord. Damage to the dryer cord, does that go in the electrical system or does it go in the dryer section? Typically, I would put it in the dryer section because the electrical ends at the outlet receptacle. In the same case here, gas distribution ends at the shutoff.
Why would you put a dryer cord in your inspection?
I don't expect
Well, it was
If you were.
an analogy.
Okay, I'm like, what am I missing here?
That's a good analogy.
The analogy is-
Okay, all right, I got you.
When you buy a house, it doesn't come with a dryer cord or flex connector
Gotcha,
or any of
okay.
those things. They come with the appliances.
So the other item was the
Disconnect.
electrical disconnect.
Electrical disconnects. And I'm not sure exactly, there's a lot of questions that could be with the electrical disconnects, like the location of them.
I
Where
would say it's the
can
same scenario. If you have a bad, a wire that's not connected, an electrical disconnect for an electric water heater, as far as where it's being put in the report, is it put in branch circuits or is it put in the appliance itself? Whatever the case may be. I was assuming that was kind of the same argument.
I don't know what generated that one. I didn't know if it was, are we still worried about the 6 disconnects together?
There's also discussion about the main panel as well.
What is the main panel? So the question came up is, if you have a service, at a service entrance, you've got a meter base, and you've got a main disconnect, and that's it. And then it goes from the main disconnect into a panel, say in the garage. Is that disconnect considered the main and the panel in the garage the sub? Because the differences would make is that a 4-wire going from the disconnect into the panel in the house? Is the panel in the house considered the sub panel? Realistically, yeah, because the ground in electrode system is going to go to that main disconnect and 4-wire into the house. And there were some questions, is that, I think that was one of the questions, was that there can be questions in older houses where you have multiple
complicated.
disconnects, or big houses with multiple panels and disconnects.
So is the question, where do they put it? Is
Well,
that the
No,
confusion?
the question is nomenclature runs into a problem in the electrical system and a few times, and that's where I've seen some of the questions is it's in the panel section. Is that a main panel? Is it a sub panel? Does it really matter? It does for some of the deficiencies, because a deficiency in the sub panel wouldn't apply to a main panel in some places. So there's some discussion that could be,
So
continued in our.
But see, for me, in the report, it doesn't, you don't have one section for service panels and one for
Right,
sub panels.
right.
It all goes in that
Yeah,
same section
right.
But you
anyway.
have some deficiencies that only apply to a sub panel and not a main.
Oh, I got you.
But you gotta have the education to know,
Well, that
like that's part
applies
of being an
everywhere.
inspector.
That applies everywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I don't know if that was exactly what spurred putting this on there, because there's always been
Yeah.
a question of nomenclature on panels, a question on, as the NEC progresses, and we've been dealing with the main, they're very specific on the
Yeah.
number of disconnects, how they're kind of located together and where they're at.
Well, we talked about doing an article about that as well, but getting some input from you guys on it because the gas appliance is much more straightforward. This is a little bit more
Yeah. I
cloudy.
don't
And
know
we've,
if this one came from you to ask to put it on there. Do we know where it came from?
well, it was actually added at the very end of the last committee meeting, we were talking about adding items when we brought up the gas distribution system. That was added.
Yeah.
But we're not sure. I don't
It may have
recall.
been me.
Lee brought it up,
Probably wasn't me.
but
But I don't know what the main,
so there wasn't a discussion going on at the rest of the committee meeting about it. So
can we put in an agenda item? to
Just
talk
if we were gonna
this?
talk about one, let's talk about the other.
Okay.
So-
Is there anything in the main disconnect area that is still confusing that we need to talk about?
The one thing we argued about was the paste. That was
oh yeah.
Well,
always a big, that
It's
was
a
a 30-minute
manufacturer requirement.
30-minute
We're
conversation on
requiring
that.
it everywhere and
Yeah.
only certain panels require it.
But I don't think it needs to
Instead
be,
of
I don't think
saying-
it needs to be beaten again. It's,
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, you
never
could
did.
modify
Talking
it.
about aluminum service wire.
yeah.
Yeah, it could be, the SOP could be modified, to note as a defect as required by the manufacturer or something, but then it requires you to know the manufacturer requirements, which are fine. That's a specific requirement that would override the general requirements of not having to know.
Yeah, but we had somebody pull, I don't remember. We had documents that came from more than manufacturer that one meeting, but
Well, the reason it was brought on the agenda though is so that you guys could discuss the recommendation to do the articles and whether or not that's appropriate enough to sort of like close the discussion on this particular item because it has come up a couple of times.
Legal, our SOP does have a pretty good section, I think, on electrical that may cover these questions.
I think the gas one is the one we really need the article for.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the one that I think I've heard
Yeah.
more than once.
Until we change the form, that will be a question.
So we don't need an article on the
I
electrical
don't
stuff?
think we would.
Okay.
That was a question.
Yeah, introduce.
Shannon Gatewood. I'm still a little confused on what the concern was with the electrical, but I guess my comment.
I am too.
goes to both. Something to look at possibly for the next time that the 7.6 is reviewed is just the nomenclature of the titles. I think a lot of the issues with the gas stuff comes from gas
Yeah.
distribution system and gas appliances. And then they say, well, am I supposed to report gas appliances on this or what? And maybe the same thing on the electrical where if it says, service entrance, main panels, disconnects as the title of the section. And then the second is branch circuits and everything beyond that. Maybe, I don't know.
Change the naming. of it.
Yeah, if they're getting confused on, well, if it's
I
a
think
sub
if
panel, am I
we-
supposed to, because technically it's a
Yeah.
branch circuit off of the main panel. I don't know what they're
Right.
thinking. I mean, I don't know, but yeah.
Until you leave the outlet receptacle. Yeah, I see what you mean. We leave, but I think if we didn't have that note, requirement to note as deficient for the flex connector in the gas distribution, that may not have been a problem.
Perhaps, yeah.
Because that one may have appropriately been in the gas appliance section. Because in the gas appliance, like for the heating, we've got general heating deficiencies, and then we got for gas heating deficiencies, maybe the flex connector would appropriately say be there.
Yeah. And I just taught a plumbing class at our chapter meeting this past week, and that was one of the points I hit on was don't get caught up in gas distribution or appliance
Yeah.
as long as it's in there. And I, threw this meeting under the bus, or not under the bus, but it's been stated in a TREC meeting, I was there, that, it's likely not gonna be an issue as long as it's
And one of those
not in foundations.
Yeah, as long as it's in an appropriate section, yeah,
Right.
you should be
So-
fine.
Good.
I think we're good there.
Sorry, and high-tech inspections, just thinking from a consumer perspective. If I'm looking at the dryer, I would get it better. I mean, if I've got all my connectors in this gas, and then I've got this thing, a consumer reading the report is gonna look at the dryer and gonna associate that connector with the dryer. I mean, I think it'd be clear to be in that section, it's in that section now. Got your dryer, lets them know the location instead of gas distribution. Well, where is that?
Well, the problem is we don't have a dryer section.
Yeah.
So that's the anomaly there, is where you put the flex connector. Oh, maybe
But
that's
you
a
put it
good
in
reason.
appliances, and when I put it in appliances, I relate all of the things wrong with the dryer. So they get it right there in a consolidated area. They don't have to go over here and go, oh, the gas connector is bad, and this is bad on the dryer. I mean, I like it all together, just from a consumer perspective. As inspectors, we're more technical and have different knowledge of it, but the consumer looks at the dryer and go, oh, this is wrong with the dryer, and the connector being in there makes more sense to me from a consumer reading perspective.
Thanks. Educational article on the gas side.
Do we want to get, just so that staff knows that that's the direction, I mean, do we want to get some sort of like thumbs up from everybody on the committee on that, or?
Part of
Yeah,
that.
I think a letter, I think education piece, I don't think.
Part of that would
Rewriting
be
it.
to identify any place a flex connector might be, where we think it should go and why, or something like that, yeah.
And
There's a limited
we'll
number.
revisit in the next SOP review, the wording of that to clarify that, and probably look at the titles of some of those as well. So, yeah.
And I think you're good.
Thank you.
Okay. Item number 11, discussion of possible action regarding 22 TAC 535.218, continuing education required for renewal.
Okay, I'm going to introduce this. I'm going to turn it over to the person who knows what it's about. No, I'm actually going to take from the preamble. So this is something that it's both education and licensing have asked to bring forth this committee, or it would be a rule change. So currently inspectors must complete 32 hours of CE. The proposed amendments remove language which specifically require that 24 hours of the CE be in particular subjects. One of those subjects is other approved courses related to real estate inspection. So the proposed amendments would also eliminate a restriction that would cap the number of hours for any of those single subjects at 16 hours. So there's currently a cap in there. The purpose of the changes would be to allow greater flexibility in the type of CE that can satisfy renewal credits requirements. And I can turn it over to Denise, who I think is going to talk a little bit more as it impacts both licensing and education, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So in Jen's absence, I will comment on the education part of it. Is, we've already got rules that prohibit duplicate course credit. And there are already rules that exist about the topics and the approval process for non-elective continuing education. And this has come up because, and I'm going to get the year wrong now, a little over a year ago, probably closer to 2 years ago, we began having inspector education providers post credit electronically for inspector continuing education. And so what that did, on the back end, probably getting too detailed, but on the back end, there were rules added to those inspector renewal applications that are looking for, the non-elective coursework within the appropriate time frame, no duplicate credit, and that cap right, of the 16 hours in any one topic. And so then we had instances where individuals would reach out and, saying that they've satisfied the CE requirements. And as it turned out, they had more than 16 hours in the other topic. And so that's how we ended up here, is a conversation with Jen's team and my team to kind of talk through, what does the rule say? What does this mean? And escalated it from there, because one of the key priorities is to keep those renewals going through quite conveniently for the inspectors, and for the vast majority of them to have that logic, checking on the back end and not go back to the time when we were reviewing every inspector renewal, checking the education, manually posting it.
So I was part of in years past, we didn't have the cap. And the problem was diversity. There were some inspectors that loved plumbing, so they did all 24 hours in plumbing every year. Never. So we made a cap to at least diversify to 2 main subject areas.
And we had a huge conversation and debate over what the number of that cap was going to be. It was 8, 12.
16 and 8, and 16 and 8 were good because most training is in 8-hour blocks.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, I think and I get a lot of calls from inspectors that have CEs denied, and some of it seems to evolve around the word, the category other is taken as a category, like plumbing, where other is not really, I don't think other would be a cap, should be a cap, because it's not a subject like plumbing or structural. It is things outside of that. Now, when interpreting other, I would say, and you look at it, if other was all plumbing or all septic that didn't fall into one of these, then okay, a cap. But if you turned in a conference that had 30 hours and it's a diverse broad, it's got, WDI, it's got septic, it's got infrared, it's got a diversity of things. I would have trouble thinking that those are all one item that would hit a 16 cap. They're just in the other block because they don't fit one of the other, 8, or, the main categories that we decided in the group. I think that's what I've seen. I don't know if that's what.
To me, the other block was like thermography, those things that don't specifically fit into that list.
So if I turn in 24 hours and it's split up between infrared, septic, and termite inspections, I wouldn't consider those 24 hours as hitting a cap because they're not all the same. The intent of the 16-hour cap was diversity.
I think our staff has something to say about that.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, like the conferences, the thermography courses would be considered other. But on the other side, when we receive a course, for example, that's 8 hours and 2 hours is talking about roofing, 2 hours is talking about plumbing, we can't divide those topics and make them so many hours. It has to be other. So the entire course has to be about one specific topic, like roofing. If it's not, then it has to be flagged as other. So we can't give the course credit and say, okay, 4 hours will go to roofing, 4 hours will go to plumbing.
Well, do you actually, in your database, break that up so that or is somebody just looking at that saying?
Like among the
meets
other, like these are the types of other?
Yeah.
I bet we don't do
No,
that.
not in licensing. The education team is doing that when they're.
They're turned into
other.
Yeah.
But then once it's approved, it's in a category. And my understanding is that rule language, it does include the other category.
Yeah.
And so that's how that system's been, the current system's been
Is it
designed.
possible to not include other or require an interpretation? Is the other used so much that it would be?
Could we get more
Too hard.
sophisticated in our other?
Well, somebody's visually looking at these things, right? It's not computer,
We-
it's not
We
AI.
base off originally when the application comes in and the provider checks the box, what the topic is. We do get a lot that say plumbing, roofing, and HVAC. The requirement is you can only check one topic per course. So if it's multiple topics, then we enter it in as other. We can't divide it up. Initially, when we're reviewing it, if there's a question where, it's a 1 hour course and 10 minutes is HVAC and the rest of it's roofing, the staff will reach out to the provider and say, okay, this course has to be, is it specifically this one topic? If it's split up, then it's considered other. And we change that to another topic.
So the
We don't
only
have-
problem with the cap is in the other category, right? Is there any way to, because a lot of inspectors get their CEUs at conferences where they can get some tremendous education. And it'll be in a variety, but when they turn it in, it's gonna fall in the other category, and it would take an interpretation of looking at it and saying, you got at least 5 different topics in this. That's not the intent of the whole intent of the 16-hour cap was to keep somebody from doing all 24 hours in one subject.
Which if we get rid of that cap, it's gonna happen again. I mean, it happened before.
But I
Somebody
mean-
that's just really strong at plumbing, every renewal, they just take 24 hours in plumbing, over and over and over and
Or
over.
they have a license in another trade.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, is there a way to work around the training that comes in from conferences that just checks the other of doing a look and verifying, I got at least 2 subjects in there?
So it's been.
Is that a tremendous
kinda-
workload?
No, it's kind of complicated, but we do have providers that have a conference and they submit a separate course
That's what I
application for each seminar. Because one seminar talks about roofing, they submit a course after that.
Yeah.
So we may get like 30 course applications for this seminar where the student or the inspector attends this seminar about roofing and then they get the credit for that roofing.
But it's the ones where they're consolidated.
Yeah, those we can't, there's just no way, because you have to ensure they attend the entire conference.
Yeah.
They
And most of
cover it,
those
but then
are
it all falls
out-
under others because there's multiple topics.
And they're out-of-state conferences that don't tailor them just to Texas inspectors. And they're not probably going to turn in and apply and pay for all those.
We recently had that.
And then we don't do a review of CE when it's like on the licensing side. Like, there's no way we could do that.
I mean, I don't want to say there's no way, but that's kind of been the progress that we've made in the last several years. And of course, I'm not remembering what, year it was. I think we're getting close to 2 years ago. Okay, thank you, Maya. I knew you would know. 2 years now where the providers are posting the CE credit electronically to eliminate the need to look at every single one, because all of the courses and all of the providers are getting approved by the education examination staff, and they're in our database. So that was an easy way to streamline.
I was going to say a way to work around would be the inspector to submit the application for other courses, but then it wouldn't really.
And I don't
meet our
know.
requirement, that standard is more for license.
What if we just
I don't know
stop
if the
dumping the
student
multiple
knows.
ones into the other category? The other category was not designed for plumbing, electrical, and roofing. Oh, well, we don't know which one, we're just gonna dump.
But
it
like
into
you said,
that.
it's the provider at the conference in Las Vegas that is not submitting 5 different classes and courses and paying.
They're
for
just
those.
lumping it all
I think-
together.
I think what we see a lot of applications that come in that, and I just use this as an example, it's a 1 hour course, 30 minutes is roofing and 30 minutes is plumbing. We can't give the student 30 minutes of this and 30 minutes of that. It's 1 hour increments.
That makes
And
sense.
we can't divide the course up and approve it in the system that way. So it has to be under one topic. So if we say roofing, they're getting credit for, they're taking foundation,
But I
or
think,
a foundation part as well. So they're doing multiple topics, but that's not how the course is approved.
With some of them I see are like 3-day courses. And it was
Yep.
1 day infrared, 1 day septic, 1 day something else. And it was pretty big blocks, 8-hour blocks of a subject. And there were 3 different subjects. But since they don't fit any of the categories, they're all other. So it's 24 hours of other, and it's like, you get 16.
I mean, it's just part of the, if you're gonna attend one of these conferences, I mean, I always check to see,
If they're gonna be
especially if I'm gonna
accepted.
send some of my guys, I check and see what hours you're
I mean,
gonna.
there has to be some responsibility on the license holder too.
Yeah,
Well, and they see it's TREC approved. They don't know it's approved as a group and not 3 different courses that were submitted.
And I think we send those to the providers, don't we tell them that? Like when we do seminars,
Yeah, you should
we
be able
have
to
a pre-conversation with
Yeah.
them before we even start reviewing the application. That, okay, you're doing a seminar, here's the problem.
It can't be
And
more
we-
than 16 hours. So if you do a
We
3-day
discussed that with
seminar,
them.
you need to submit at least 2 approved programs.
I mean, could we not have the
Yeah.
education provider, when they provide that class, say, this is 8 hours in other as under this TREC definition, or 8 hours in roofing in this TREC definition? So at least they would know which.
It sounds like a lot of them do, but some of them don't.
No, yes, that's
Yeah.
correct. Yes.
So it-
Some of the conferences aren't.
Can we not require that?
Well, they just don't get the max, they'll just max out at 16
16.
hours. That's what's happened before, and they've got to quickly take another 8-hour class. It happens, but it's when you don't understand that you submitted 32 hours, 4 days at a conference,
yeah.
and you don't know to the last minute. There's like, I only got 16, and they didn't know why. They didn't understand that the provider had a, one catch-all class for the approved for the whole thing.
That was very common,
Yeah.
particularly when this rule went into effect, because we were getting a lot of calls and emails from licensing.
Yeah.
License holders sending in the information and they're not understanding. So that's when we started reaching out to the providers and like, when you're offering these courses, this course, they get other, because you're covering multiple topics. So we put that back on the providers to make sure the students understand
I
that.
can see where the inspectors, all they know is they sign up and it's TREC approved. And we've got 24 hours of TREC approved training, come get it. They don't realize when they only turned in one 24-hour class, they're only going to get credit for 16. They turn it in to their MCE and all they know is they keep checking every day and it's not renewed. What's up? And then they realize they're short 8 because there was a max. Conference only did 1. It's kind of a communication and understanding of how, you sign up for it. There should be probably at least 2 different course numbers. If it's just 1 course number, you may run into that max.
Like I said, some providers will divide those up.
Yeah.
We'll get multiple course applications, if it's like a 3-day course. But some don't.
Real quick,
I see how that happens.
Shannon Gatewood again. I'm not sure if this actually solves the problem, but it's running through my head. Can we leave that exactly the same and just break out other to where you get maximum of 16 hours in the foundation framing, blah, 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 and then others just.
Well, then you run in the guy that takes 24 hours of septic. The whole intent was to,
Oh, he still only gets his, yeah, I guess in the other it is.
So I
it
think
limits the abuse, but yes.
part of the reason we wanted to bring it to this group was to ask that question, because this breakdown, and Mike, you jump in if I'm not getting this right, the breakdown of the topics for CE only exists for the inspector's CE approval. And so that was the purpose to ask, is it more of a problem for the inspectors that are taking the seminars that are
Yes.
varied and valuable, or is this strictly targeting
I think that's the
the
only
person
place
that's
that-
taking the, 24 hours of plumbing at each room?
Yeah. Well, I think the problem that's come up is only been the seminars and the other. And the intent is working, I believe, on the people that don't have to use the other block and they're just using the main. They're doing 2. And I think that's working as intended.
Why can we not have a different category called multiple or something
That's what the other is.
Well, I know, but okay, we'll create a different, you keep putting septic under other, so if there's a category that,
Like
yes,
say 3 or more
this course
topics.
contains multiple topics. If you add a separate category, then you don't cap that, whatever
Well,
we decide to
one
call that
possibility is-
category.
We call it a mixed category.
Yeah, mixed, multiple, diverse.
Well, that's kind of the other, well, one possibility is pull other out of that cap. And you would definitely reduce the pool of abuse that we had, with
Okay.
all.
Well, I'm
plumbing.
saying the optional systems don't need to go under.
Right now, all of our optional systems are in other.
Okay, and that's what I'm saying.
That's what I mean,
Optional needs to be separated from this multiple
Yeah,
subject matter class.
that could be a possibility.
That's what
So
I had,
those main areas came from looking at the main areas in the SOP.
Okay, Tony?
Thank you. What I'm hearing is that this problem seems to be more unique to a seminar situation. But it sounds like seminars, they do get pre-approved for a block of credit, but then when it's being allocated, that's when the problem is. So I think Mike's suggestion of having another category specifically for seminars that have been pre-approved at credit block, then you could raise the credit to whatever has been approved and then apply it as a credit to the individual under that category, pre-approved seminar credit.
And also, this isn't just seminars either, and I've just clarified that. We do get regular course applications. They're 4 or 5 hours. They're the same situation.
Yeah, I think that whenever you started diversification, you created a problem to start with. And it's kind of like in the past, whenever that was voted on, certain members of the IC were saying that, I'd like to take classes on weekend that I have a problem with. And then it didn't go anywhere. But we have a difficult situation that's not simple anymore. And I think as long as it's going to remain like it is, it'll continue. And the argument was about taking so many hours, like in plumbing. Plumbers take plumbing every year just to get their 16 hours, right, or whatever. It's going to continue one way or the other. There's nothing perfect.
Right.
But I'd say go with the simplest way to do it, where it doesn't take a committee to discuss it all day long.
I mean,
It's been discussed a bunch in the past. And so here we are again. What is other? So I'd suggest that we fine tune it or go back to where we were.
and it's probably a small pool of people that run into the problem.
That's what I'm saying. Is that
A small pool of people that,
violate or
This issue.
misuse it.
yeah,
I think
there were quite a few in the past that.
There were quite a few in the past that
Yeah.
misused it that would do
A
the
lot,
same.
But it's no different than going to a class and here everybody is, and there's a bunch asleep over there. And he's getting as much credit as the one that's awake.
That's a whole different subject.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it, but it's there. So you're not going to create the scenario where everybody's
Well, we also have to remember, these are minimum requirements.
right.
There is nothing stopping anybody from exceeding these by any leaps or bounds. I mean,
I understand.
most license holders I know go well above the 32 hours in a renewal period. These are just the bare minimum requirements.
The idea,
To renew.
somebody would only.
Was there a complaint or something that came in?
Yeah.
Or what motivated?
No, it was a handful of inspector license holders who went to renew, and our system was working as designed,
Yeah.
which is following the language of the rule. And courses that were categorized as other, they were not able to get the full
Yeah.
seat credit for
They
it.
just went to another 8 hours.
And so then that just spurred a conversation. I guess it was,
Yeah.
frequent enough. So Jen's team met with my team. We kind of
So we
talked through
either
it.
need to get rid of it all or just leave it, right? Basically, it's our option.
New category that can, if there's a course that contains more than one subject, there's a new category for it, and it's not capped.
Well, it could probably be fixed by just adding an optional
Yeah.
item, a TREC optional item category. Because
Yeah,
half of the classes that people take in the seminar are one of the 5 optional items for TREC.
Yeah, optional would be capped.
Separate than
right?
other.
You're saying,
Yeah.
yeah, optional would be septic.
Instead of making-
sprinkler system.
Instead of canceling all of it, just add
optional.
the TREC optional items.
Would that not just be other?
No,
Well, no, because it could be infrared, there could be termites, stuff
we
like
have a
that.
section for
Don't have
optional.
anything to do with TREC. I thought the other were things that didn't have anything to do with TREC, but they were inspection related.
Well, if you look at the rule, other is
Related
not,
materials.
yeah, other is not a topic. It's a other related courses.
Whereas
Yes, exactly.
the optional items,
Right.
TREC's optional items probably should have a category.
Yeah, rather than being.
So if I take septic, which is a TREC optional item, it gets thrown in other.
So we can come up with optional.
Just add, what is it, number 9, 10? What comes after report writing? Put in like the TREC optional items, which are those 5 of them that are on the report form. And they would all go in that because half of the ones they take.
You could, I mean, yeah, that's an option.
And that
but
would probably
doesn't
fix half
solve- But that doesn't solve,
Doesn't solve that.
like if somebody submits a 4-hour course,
Right.
and 2 hours is roofing and 2 hours is plumbing,
Still gonna be a,
it's still, that's gonna fall into other.
there's
That's
still gonna
probably-
be,
You know, it doesn't,
Do you want to remove the cap from other?
Take the cap off other and create optional.
It's
I
still,
mean, if we take the cap off other, we should just not have a cap on any of it because I'm just gonna load up on all the optional.
What
stuff.
stops somebody from doing 24 hours of
The only thing they
Yeah.
would put under other.
I don't know, yeah.
yeah, you do 24-hour course on IR and not learn anything.
I kind of went Bruce, let's just get it, just take it out. Let's go back to the simple. I mean,
This,
there's
You
just
just
no,
don't have to do anything.
this
Yeah,
is the
right.
big
I
problem.
know.
I was going to say a relatively.
We talked about it for 20
large
minutes.
problem.
so let's
It's
do
created
something.
real small.
Well, and guys, maybe I'll speak up here from a consumer side and outsiders. This seems to be a problem with the course providers not giving the right information to the council for the approval of the CLE, because when they submit it, they ought to say, this course will have 8 hours of foundation, 4 hours of roofing, 4 hours of plumbing, 8 hours of HVAC, and the problem's solved.
But you can't, right?
Well, why wouldn't,
You
but why
could have
wouldn't you?
separate applications for those.
But why wouldn't you go to the provider and say, look, if you're gonna do if you're gonna have an 8-hour course, 4 hours in roofs, 4 hours in foundations, instead of doing that, because you may cause a problem for your students,
Right.
you need to create 2 4-hour courses, one for 4
we'll
hours. for
typically
roofing, one-
reject that application and send it back to them, and then they resubmit 2 applications.
There you go. That's the thing, is have them submit it and say this course, in air quotes, comprises the following 4 course numbers, that then have an approval for 4 hours in each of these areas or 8 hours, and we're done.
I think that's what gets done. They can resubmit their application and up to the student that's taking the class to say, what am I gonna get credit for? I mean, you have to put it on the flyer.
It's TREC
What's it-
approved, but it
And that's
maxes at
if- and
16.
that's if they'll do
No,
it.
that's misleading. I mean, it's misleading to say it's TREC approved, but to only get a certain number of hours.
What if,
You have 16 of 24.
Yeah, you gotta list your course numbers on there.
well, we
They've only got one.
require them to list their
Right.
course numbers. What if we require them to list a category?
It still is a problem, even if it says 8 hours of
They just.
roofing, whatever, it's submitted as one.
Well, we're the one licensed agent supervisors that do this. We're the ones that put a cap on it. Okay, so if we're requiring them to put the course number, and here's what the course number is. It is, if it's an 8-hour course, it's 8 hours of roofs, or it's 8 hours of other.
Yep.
As, per rule, blah, 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 blah. But maybe if we add that classification in there, that, here's my course, here's the flyer that I'm taking, because every provider is required to give an example of the flyer that they're going to use to make sure the provider number's in there, the course number's in there, so on and so forth. If they just put right down at the end of what the actual classification of that course is, it's 8 hours of foundations.
But it's still under one approved.
I think if you start taking courses, 1 hour here, 2 hours there, 4 hours there, 8 hours there, it's gonna be a nightmare trying to figure out if you got your 16 hours in this or which one we're going to kick out and accept when you do that. Because there's a whole lot of courses out there.
We do that now. I mean,
I know
I take
it, but
a
we're-
2-hour course every single month.
Yeah.
But each one has its own course number.
Right.
It's approved.
I don't think that's a big a deal, guys, because in the legal world where I work, we do that all the time. Everything is a 1-hour block. I've got to have 15 1-hour blocks a year, and I may get it in one conference or I may get it in 15. You know, that's just on the applicant to keep track of that and look at their figures.
That's the difference.
That's the way most
It's a big
licenses.
difference.
Yeah.
We don't
That's why-
ever get limited.
I
Right.
think we just get a little too
Too technical,
policing over
too specific.
inspectors for some reason.
Steve's right, though. I think it did eliminate a big problem and possibly create a small problem when we put this 16-hour cap in there, because we were getting that a lot, where people were just reviewing the same stuff over and over and over and over.
You look at their history and they've taken 15 years of plumbing, nothing
Yep.
But were you
else.
seeing problems with that in terms of complaints or?
It usually, it came up when we were looking at enforcement action, and I would start looking at their education history, and it's like,
Well,
he's never taken anything but plumbing since he got his license.
since being director,
Itself?
education is, most orders you see,
Yeah, the order said.
they will more than likely include an education
Yes.
function unless it's some sort of technical violation of some kind. But it's
Only
something
if they-
substantive, we're gonna make them go, like 8 to 10 to 4 hours of education. Now, I don't know, understand that's on the back end and it's not as helpful for the consumer that got hurt on the front end, but
And this
that is
is
something at least.
what produces, in theory, ideally, the better inspector? Somebody who has a more diverse education, or somebody who has the option to just take the same topic over and over and over?
I don't have a strong opinion, that it's not my job to have strong opinions, but just lobbing a few things out there. I think there's a difference between what makes the best inspector and what the minimum requirement should be. That's one thought. Which is what this agency does, right? Set a minimum requirement. The market kind of does the rest in the disciplinary process. But then I was thinking about what's required of me as a lawyer, and I could essentially go take all of my CE in oil and gas, personal injury law, anything, doesn't matter. It doesn't have to apply to the work I actually do. And there's no policing of that.
Well, the exception to that, though, is if you're board certified, though, like I am, and I have to prove I have 15 hours in construction law,
That's exactly right. But here,
That's in the
there's no
minority of
added
court.
certification. So I'm not saying that I'm not using that to argue against what you're doing, but more to just say in other industries, there's not this higher level of scrutiny on the type of courses taken.
And this doesn't impact the non-elective courses.
Right. There's some
They all
courses you have to take.
Yeah, that's why we're just talking 24.
What are you gonna do?
I like the 16. I think it forces diversity in there. I understand the problem from the, from staff standpoint, but I think part of that could be addressed with, if you want to add the optional systems category in there, I think that's part of it. But I think if the education providers who are applying for these courses, I think they should reapply for this. If it's half roof and half plumbing, make it 2 4-hour courses, because otherwise you're going to run into a problem for your students of capping out the 16 hours on the other.
So we could,
We
So-
can explore that on the provider side.
so the small group
That's right.
of inspectors who are running into this issue, that could be made even smaller with a little more education with the providers.
It's possible too.
I mean, we can look into that and, some more communication with providers when we're.
I mean, sometimes maybe they don't know that when they group them together, they're causing a problem with the Texas inspectors that doesn't apply to the other 49 states.
I think a majority, well, I'm gonna say
Yeah.
many times that we get those applications, we check one topic, then they'll check multiple topics, and staff will email them or call them and say, you've got to choose one, and the whole course has to be one topic, or it becomes other. And some will change it, some say that's fine, leave it as other.
I mean, if you put a notation in there in that application, keep in mind inspectors cannot get more than 16-hour credit in one particular topic. I mean, there's
I like
educational
that
opportunity.
direction to just whittle down the problem ones to even smaller. Yes, sir.
I'm just understanding here, the problem that it limits other to 16 hours is because it's included specifically as a single subject category.
Yes.
So
And by definition,
what if we were to take it out of there
that was
that
my initial
section,
thought, was.
and then just make it, you know, it could be, it doesn't have to be a single subject category. However, you could still require that within the other category, you take no more than 16 hours.
I don't think that.
Well, because the providers are now uploading that information themselves, the staff doesn't have the opportunity to know what the difference in those categories were. I think that was the
When
issue.
they dump them all into the other, software flags it and max is 16, doesn't matter if they put in 40. And sometimes because of communication, the inspector doesn't realize it. They assume they're ready to go, they pay their fee and then like nothing happens.
I think we start with the providers. I think that's the best place to start there.
Let's see what we can do on that.
Okay. So you have that dead horse on the table?
So
There it is. Dissect it a little at a time.
All right. Tony, the sheet you gave me says number 12, 438.
I know, I'm sorry, that's a typo.
Okay.
Unless you want to talk about 438, I'm happy to discuss it at length.
All right, so we'll move into update regarding HB 1363 and required rule changes.
Yeah, so I'll start with that and then Abby will continue on. So we, as all of you know, HB 1363 was the repeal of the Inspector Recovery Fund. That bill was actually signed by the governor, went into effect. So that process is, we're started implementing that process. And essentially what the bill requires is for the amount in the recovery fund, so in stages, a portion gets set to GR, then we determine any outstanding liability because there can still be claims against us. So we hold money aside. Once that deadline is passed, then this staff will determine who the eligible inspectors are, and there's a definition of that. And then those eligible inspectors will get a credit of $10, which is what the current recovery fund fee is, towards their renewal following that determination. And then any other additional leftover money will be put into GR. So that process is a lengthy one. I don't believe it ends until 2026.
Yeah, so 4 years.
But we started at the end of this year. We'll do our first GR submission. But there are some rule changes that are needed as part of the implementation, and I'll let Abby speak to that.
Yeah, so we have really 3 rules that we're looking at presenting for both proposal at the August meeting and then also for emergency adoption at the August meeting because of the September 1 effective date. So the first one has to do with the Consumer Protection Notice. The Consumer Protection Notice referenced the Inspector Recovery Form or Fund, and so we'll strike those references from the form itself, have to update the rule with that. The second has to do with fees. So because of the way the bill is worded, in the current inspector fee section, there is a reference to that $10 recovery fund fee that has to be paid. But because of the way that the bill is worded, we can't just straight repeal it for the next year or so. We have to keep that language in, but we'll add a caveat that says for applications submitted prior to September 1st, there's this $10 fee. That will be removed eventually once kind of the bill language works itself out. And then the third rule change is in the admin penalty rule 219, which it references a statute really having to do with the Consumer Protection Notice, but that particular statute is being repealed. There is another statute that gives us the authority to create the Consumer Protection Notice. So there's no change there other than we're swapping out that particular statutory reference with the rule reference, which is 220G. So those are really it. There's a few other places in our rules that do reference the recovery fund, but again, because as Tony mentioned, it's going to be open for a little bit longer. We have to keep those in place for just a little bit longer. So that's really it, unless there are any questions.
And the change to consumer protection notice, that link will stay the same for everybody. We won't have to modify.
Yeah,
That's-
we
I just
tried
want
to
to make
do
sure
that.
that got,
Yeah, that's the website set up that, so if you link to that
it will have
page,
the most updated.
it'll have the most updated version.
Just the form itself.
Just wanted to state it because I know that'll be a question.
Oh, absolutely, that's a valid question.
All right, anybody have any questions? No? Okay. Next item, request for future meeting agenda items. We talked about the one earlier from David, that'll go to education subcommittee,
The virtual practicum.
virtual reality practicum.
And then the fillable SOP is another one. So those two are the two I have from this meeting. I don't know if there's anything else.
Fillable report.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
going to the SOP. One's going to education, one's going to SOP.
Anybody else have any items for future agenda? Seeing none online, none here. All right. Discussion possible action regarding future meeting dates, calendar time.
We have one scheduled, right?
Yeah, but we just have to verify just in case something changed.
Yeah.
We still have October 16th set as at 10 a.m. I believe is what we had talked about the last meeting. Everybody's still okay with October 16th? We're trying to have these meetings in person if at all possible. Please, so I'm seeing nodding online. Everybody's okay there?
Farewell tour.
The farewell tour, Steve's farewell tour. Might have to bring you kolache on the way down or something, you know. All right, all dates for the following one, January 17th or January 18th. 17th is a Tuesday, 18th is a Thursday.
No, it's January 17th is a Wednesday.
Or sorry, Wednesday and Thursday, yeah.
Is that in?
Wednesday and Thursday.
It's MLK, it's an MLK weekend, right? So the
yeah.
16th is that Tuesday. That's what you're at, unless you want to take one of those alternate days.
Oh, I got you. Okay, so
The 16th is what had been sent out prior. I think we talked about that in the last meeting, was looking at the 16th, because that's what I have hard calendared already.
yeah, sorry, I read that wrong. I read the alternate dates. That's my bad. So everybody's still okay with the 16th? Anybody have any issue? Steve, I know you're okay with the 16th.
I'm gonna watch it.
All right, so we'll do 16th. 10 a.m. Calendar. Actually, 10, great. All right, anybody else have any other items? With that, we'll adjourn the meeting at 11:32.
Thank you, everybody.
Good seeing everyone. Bye, y'all.
Thank you.